Happy to have everyone on today.
Today's topic is potatoes. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We were very fortunate to have Master Gardener to teach his class today or give a seminar on growing potatoes. Her name is Katie Bishop, and you've probably seen her before if you've tuned into these Lunch and Learn Garden Guest seminars. Katie's our vegetable coordinator down at the food bank. She's a professional assistant at the UT Hamilton County office. And she's Master Gardener volunteer, Master Gardener of Hamilton County. So without further ado, I'll just let Katie take it over. Thank you, Katie.
All right. It's a little PowerPoint, and it starts from the beginning all the way through harvest on how to grow potatoes. So you will hopefully get most of your questions answered on potatoes, and if not, send them in the chat box, and I'm sure somebody will ask me later on towards the end. Potatoes is a starchy crop grown underground. It's a member of the nightshade family, so that includes tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. It's the world's fourth largest food, and they prefer well-drained, loose soil. But if anybody's grown potatoes, you know it will grow in just about anything. If you leave part of a potato with an eye in the compost pile, it will probably grow. You plant seed potatoes in the early spring and harvest when the plant starts to die off, and usually within 90 days. You can obviously harvest earlier than that. You'll just have smaller potatoes. And when I do them in the raised bed, I get about 8 potatoes per plant. So if you can go in ground, you'll see later on when I talk about this, if you can hill them up further and add more potatoes, the plant will produce more plants of potatoes. But since I do most of the stuff at the food bank, well, I do all of it in raised bed, you can probably only hill them over one time. That's why we only get about 8 potatoes. This is to demonstrate that tomatoes and potatoes are in the same family. The top is a Rutgers, and that has a typical tomato leaf on it. The bottom is a brandywine. So if you have a tomato that they call a potato leaf, this is what they're referring to. They're in the same nightshade family. So some of your tomatoes will have a potato leaf. So you'll notice the leaves on these, the seed leaves are exactly the same. Those are the ones closest to the dirt there. And then the true leaf, once they come out, you'll notice that those are different. So if you are growing brandywine, you won't have a typical tomato leaf on it. You will have a potato leaf on it. So if the package of your tomato seeds says potato leaf tomato, that's all they're referring to is the shape of the leaf, because they are in the same family. The food bank gets their potatoes, the seed potatoes, from ACE. And that's why that ACE bag is there, because the food bank partners with ACE. So there's an account there that I can go in and have everything charged on. You can use regular potatoes. You'll notice that some of them in your pantry may start to sprout the eyes. It's called the eyes, and they may get a little longer and start to sprout, especially if they're maybe organic potatoes. Some of them have been sprayed with a suppressant so they don't sprout in the store. The light from the store will cause the potatoes to sprout in store. And if they're dark in the pantry, they won't sprout as easily. So most people store them in a cool, dark place so they don't sprout. But if they've been sprayed, you may not get as many sprouts to start, many eyes to start. So therefore, usually get the seed potatoes. They haven't been sprayed with anything. They're very cheap this way. You'll get a whole bag full. This is about 20 potatoes in a 5-pound bag. And when you get it, just go through it and check for any mushy, brown, gross looking potatoes. And you'll see that these have more sprouts on them once you buy them as seed potatoes. The first thing you do to prepare potatoes to be planted is you'll need a very sharp knife, not a serrated one, because that jagged edge will cut the potato itself sort of jagged, and that will allow for more bacteria to set in. So you want a smooth surface so it dries. You're going to cut the potatoes so they only have 2 or 3 eyes on them and on each piece. If the bigger ones, you can probably cut into thirds or you can cut into half. It just depends on how many eyes look like are going to sprout on those potatoes. You don't want too many eyes because then you end up with a really big bushy plant. And you don't necessarily need a big bushy plant for a harvest. You don't want the plant competing for all the energy for the leaves. You want a lot of that energy to go towards producing the potato and not the energy to maintain the plant. Is that making sense? So you want the plant to struggle a little bit so it produces more potatoes. So you want two or three decent eyes on it, and just cut them with a clean knife. You can see here about the size they all are. And I generally just let them air dry. If the potato is small, there's really no need to cut it. So you're looking for, if a potato is a little bigger than a golf ball, or fits easily in the palm of your hand. I was trying to think something a little bigger than a golf ball, but if it's a small potato, you won't need to cut it. You can just use it like that. This picture is on the bottom shelf in the greenhouse at the food bank. And you just let them sit there several days in a cool place out of the sun. And this is to harden them off. And they're going to turn, I think it's the next slide, they'll turn really ugly, kind of brown and black. And you can see just within those 2 or 3 days how big the sprout is getting on that. But this is called chitting, C-H-I-T. So you chit the potatoes, and that means they'll just start to sprout and the rest of it hardens off. You want it to harden off so when you plant it, it just doesn't mush out and die in the ground. So it's okay that it looks brown like this. That's not exactly soft and mushy. It's just not scabbed over, but it's dried out. That's just the starches in the potato itself that is oxidizing with the air. It's the same kind of thing as when you cut an apple, and if you let it sit out, it turns a little brown. It's just brown sugar. That's what I used to tell my kids. So this is just the starches in there. They will turn brown and black, but that's fine. You dig a trench, and in the food bank, you can do this deeper if you're in the ground. In the food bank, in a raised bed or in a large pot, you only have so much soil to deal with. So I can't dig any deeper in that. Otherwise, I'd have to store all the dirt like in a wheelbarrow or in a huge trash can. And I'm not going to do that down there. It's just too inconvenient. So I dig a trench in a raised bed at least 8 inches deep. And I leave the soil either at one end or piled up in the middle. And then you can plant a seed potato every 12 inches with the sprouts going up, obviously. And then you cover that with at least 6 inches of soil. So here's a whole bed planted, and you can see how I have the soil stacked up on the sides and on the end. And that's the soil I use to cover up 6 inches. So this is roughly every 12 inches. That's quite a few potatoes in there. Depending on the soil temperature, when you get them in, it takes about 2 weeks for them to sprout. And this is the potatoes the leaves just emerging. So if it's obviously a little warmer, it may sprout up in, 10 days instead of 12 or 2 weeks. Kind of just depends on Mother Nature. Then when they grow to be about 12 inches tall, you can cover them halfway with the soil. So that's what I was talking about. I use the soil that's on the edge of the beds and just pull that. You don't need to take the leaves off or anything else. Just pile the soil right on top of the plant. Now, if you're in ground, you can dig a little deeper trench. We tried down there to dig in, to make little deep pots, holes in the ground. But the sun didn't even reach those holes well enough, and we ended up having to dig them back up and raise them a little. They obviously are going to grow to the sun. They need the sun, and that's what sprouts them in the grocery stores, going towards the sunlight. So they do need the sun. You can't get them too deep that the ground is too cold and the sun never hits them. So you could, 8 inches is a guess. You can go 10 inches as long as the sun can get to them. In a raised bed, that's a little more difficult. If it's in a deep pot, you could probably tilt the pot a little to begin with. And then as the plant comes out and is taller, then you can set the pot even. And then you could add more soil and more soil and more soil. The deeper you can get your potato, and the more times you can repeat this hilling, the more potatoes you will get. But that's all there is to it. You just keep adding more soil and soil and soil. So obviously in a raised bed, the sides that we're already at the top of the raised bed. So I can generally just do that once. And the reason you do this is that the main part of the plant will shoot off a stolon, and I have pictures of this. So that's the little string-like or root-like that the potato forms on the end of. So if you can get some potatoes to start at the bottom and cover it up, move my hand down, and then they'll start to grow here. Then if you can cover that up again and your plant continues to grow, so as many times as the plant can grow and you can cover it up, the more potatoes you will get. The potatoes at the bottom will be bigger, and then obviously the potatoes on the top will be a little smaller. So this is the bed after it's been hilled up one time, and then we mulched it. And the mulch keeps the sunlight off the newer potatoes that form at the surface, and also keeps the ground a little cooler, and it will help so you don't have to water as much either. The potatoes that grow too near the surface will, if they get too much sunlight, they'll turn a little green. And that's solanase. And that is just the potato turning green from the sunlight. If you were to eat a lot of that, it would probably give you a stomach ache. Usually most people just cut off the green part of the potato and you're good. But if you do have a potato with that green on it, that just means that was one growing closer to the surface and it got too much sunlight. So you want to keep the sunlight off the potatoes. And that's what mulch does. 1 to 2 inches of water per week. You want to use a fertilizer 5-10-10 or 8-24-24. 2 weeks after planting, and then once again later on in the growing season. I generally don't worry too much about fertilizing the potatoes. Potatoes do well. You don't want to use a fertilizer with a high nitrogen. Nitrogen is your first number. So you notice both of these have a lower nitrogen number, and then the other two numbers. The other two numbers, the second number is for more of the root structure on it, or sometimes the blossoms, but the first number is for the big bushy greens. So the plant's doing well enough, we don't have to worry about nitrogen for more greens. What you want to do is to encourage more of the potatoes connected with the underground. So, and then the third number is for the general overall health of the plant. I've fertilized some years and not fertilized others. I really couldn't tell that much different with it. If you have a shorter growing period, which we generally do down there, I try to encourage, because we'll pull these up at least in June so we can get summer crops in. So I try to encourage the potatoes just to grow faster. But just look for one that, the 5-10-10 is fine. If you can't find it, sometimes they're harder to find. You can certainly use just a 10-10-10. You're not going to wreak havoc on your potato crop, that's for sure. A 10-10-10 is generally a good basic for all of yours. You definitely don't want to use like a 20-10-10, but a 10-10-10 is generally good for all of your vegetable crops. But if you can find, it would be the same if you're growing carrots or beets. You want to use a 5-10-10. So anything that's underground, use less nitrogen. You don't have to be real structured with that growing. You want the plant to get established. This is what the flower looks like. It's really a pretty little flower. And generally after it flowers, that means that's when the potatoes are really starting to form well. If you have a white flower, you have white potatoes. And the red potatoes will have that purple flower. They're both the same pretty little star-shaped flower. They use potatoes to grow in all kinds of different containers. That's why I said this is a grocery bag, a recycle bag, the EPB bags that they put out at the Sunday markets, but you can use any types of bags like that. You could use just a bag of regular potting soil. If you dumped most of the bag out into a wheelbarrow or a large pot, rolled the sides down like this, had some drain holes put in the bottom so it just didn't fill up with water. Put your potato in there with the sprout up. And then as the potato plant grew, once it got to be about 8 inches tall, you can roll up the sides of the bag, add more soil back in. And then when it's again 8 inches, you never want to cover it more than about halfway. So if your plant is 12 inches, you can cover it 6 inches. And again, this is the guess. Potatoes are very hardy. They'll even take a light freeze. We generally put ours in sometime mid-March. And if we get a freeze the first part of April, some of the leaves may get burnt, but we generally don't have snow in April, so we're doing okay. But even the leaves that have gotten burnt, it didn't bother the plants too much. They came right back. So it's a good spring crop. But then as the plant grows and you cover it up again, you can roll the bag up again. And that's why some people, I don't know if you may have not heard of this, but they used to use tires, and then they'd add another tire and put more soil, and add another tire and put more soil. So anything that you can think of to do it like this, like I said, even a bag of potting soil, if you can save the rest of the soil, you can just roll up the sides, and then every once in a while punch some drain holes in there. So when it got to be this big, I pulled up the sides and added more soil. So this is my little granddaughter. She dumped the bag out, and those were the potatoes that we got from that one little bag. These make wonderful little projects for kids because you can probably do it from a potato from the store. And where I grew up in Florida, we had sand. So Mom used to just reach under the potato plant and pull out a couple potatoes for dinner. So if your soil's soft enough, you can certainly do that with a bag like this too. But the kids just generally have a good time just hunting for potatoes, kind of like Easter eggs. When you dig the potatoes, you just want to dig next to the plant. Don't try to pull them up. You'll lose a lot of potatoes, but you just dig right next to the plant. The seed potato. So if the plant was in there long enough, that seed potato would really mush out. So when you dig your potato plant up, you may find one mushy one. That's probably the seed potato you planted. Not unless your potato's in the ground a long, long time, which at the food bank, it's not necessarily in there that long for the seed potato, for the seed itself to completely rot away. But it's generally a big mushy mess. But that's what stores the energy. That's what feeds the initial plant, is that potato there. So that's what, like a regular seed has all the energy for the little seedling to start, that has all the energy for the potato plant to start. So this is the stolon that I was talking about. You'll see the white shoestring that looks like it's coming off. So all the potatoes are attached to the main part of the stem by a stolon. And that's not a plant root. That's just the function of the plant itself. This plant was only hilled in or buried one time, and this is one plant. So this is about as many potatoes that I got from that one plant. Now, if you can bury it more, you'll obviously get more potatoes. But if you've got a section in a raised bed and you can just put in 4 or 5 potato plants, if it's a section you're not going to do anything with, you know, you may get 30 potatoes. They store a long time. Then you don't want to harvest or fertilize. You don't want to water or fertilize 2 weeks before harvest. You just, and last spring when it rained so much, we had a hard time with that. We eventually just had to dig them up. So it's just to let the plants sit, not go into production again. And you can see these plants are just barely starting to die off at the bottom. We could have left them in there longer and the potatoes would have gotten bigger. We weren't going to hill them in again, so there was really no need. We wanted to go ahead and get this out and put in a summer crop. Just depends on where your priorities are. You can let potatoes go longer into the summer. It won't hurt them. But I should warn you, if you don't dig up all the potatoes, if you leave like a half of one in there, and it's a decent enough one, and this happens to us every year. As soon as the temperature cools off again in the fall, that will sprout up. It won't sprout up in the summer when the soil is hot. Just like any other seed, it needs the correct temperature for the soil for it to germinate. So once the soil cools off in the fall, we always have an errant potato plant sprouting up somewhere in the corner. All right, some general things. If they're too close to the surface, they'll turn green. Bury the potatoes as best you can and use mulch. Solanine. All right, I almost had it right. If there's a small amount of it, just cut it off. You want to store them out of the sunlight. When you first dig them up out of the ground, the skins will be very soft and they will scratch and rip very easily. So don't try to wash them or even brush a lot of the dirt off. Let them just air dry right out in the sun where you harvest them just for a while. And then you can brush a little of the soil off. But you don't really want to wash them or scrub them until you're ready to use them. They will store much better that way. If you've cut one with the shovel or the very small ones, you want to use those first. The smaller ones, they taste just as good, but they do not store well. They'll turn soft within a couple days. So I would use them within 3 days. Just have a little serving of potatoes and butter and parsley. And use the split ones too. A split sweet potato or a cut sweet potato will ooze out and harden off, but a regular potato will not. I have never, around here you will get the red potatoes and the little white potatoes. You won't get baked potatoes or the big Idaho russet baking potatoes or anything like that. What grows around here generally are just the smaller red ones and the smaller white ones. And I could not tell you the names of all of the potatoes. They are all kinds of different names, just like they are in the tomato family. But I generally just go and get whatever Ace has, because I don't care if I eat the red ones or the white ones. They're very easy to grow, very little fertilizer, little water, 1 inch a week, just about like most vegetables. The flea beetles are fairly common with eggplant as well, which is in the same family. If your plant's big enough, they just sort of lace out the leaves, and you really don't need to worry about that. If the plant is small and you get an infestation of flea beetles, you'll know if you have them. They're teeny tiny little beetles that look just like a flea. And they're hard. You can't really catch them or chase them, or they hop all over the place. So if your potato plants are completely covered with them, you may have to treat it. Usually I don't treat them at all, and I've never had any problem with it. So if you have a sunny spot, go ahead and give it a try. That I had mentioned in there that the potato and the sweet potato are completely two different types of plants. Regular potatoes are in the nightshade family. The sweet potatoes are in the morning glory family. So, and they grow obviously underground, but they're completely different family. Nightshade family, the leaves are not edible and are poisonous. The sweet potato, the leaves are edible, and people treat them like greens. They're in completely different different types of family.
Sweet potatoes grown in the same way?
Really, for them, not for the potatoes themselves, but the vines. The vines can trail out all across. I don't have pictures, and I probably should edit this because it's always questions on the sweet potatoes connected with this. The sweet potatoes love it hot. So that's generally in the summer, not in the spring or fall. I know people have grown these in the fall, but you need to probably get the regular potatoes up before the freeze. So I generally do them in the spring. They finish off better when it's warmer. And the sweet potatoes like the ground really, really hot. You buy little plants called slips. And I've never tried to, you probably can sprout them from the potato itself. I haven't done that. Usually the hardware stores have a 9-pack for some reason of sweet potatoes. And you just buy the plant itself called a slip and put those in there. And then they just grow all summer, but the vines can trail out quite a ways. And I've taken them and tried to just wrap them around in the raised beds. And I've had to cover them in the past because the rabbits like to eat them, the deer like to eat them, the woodchuck like to eat the leaves. And people, I think they're more popular in Asian country cuisines. And I grew 2 different kinds last year, and there was a gentleman in there looking just for greens, and I let him sample the 2 greens because he was going to grow them the next year. And he said there was quite a distinct difference in the flavor. So if you're going to do sweet potatoes in the summer and you want to use some of the greens as well in your cooking, you'd have to research which ones have a more flavorful green. Some of them are more bitter, just like any of your kale and chard. Some of the greens are more bitter and some are more tender. I think he said the Centennial tasted better than the Beauregard. Beauregard is typically what's grown around here. And the sweet potatoes, just like the regular potatoes, have slightly different color and slightly different texture and sweetness to them, different flavor. I guess I'm not really a sweet potato connoisseur. I pretty much like them all. I couldn't quite tell you the difference in the I would think it's a difference in the starchiness, the same as some of the other potatoes, and that's why some potatoes are better for baking and some are frying and some are for mashed. But the sweet potatoes are the same type and same type of fertilizer. You don't have to bury the plants. You just put the plants in and you don't have to hill them in afterwards. But you want to mulch it and keep it free of weeds and try to keep the potatoes buried because they will grow up closer to the surface as well. Sweet potatoes are just as easy as regular potatoes to grow. They're just in a different family. You know, people always want to grow tomatoes, and peppers during the summer. Sweet potatoes are an excellent way to give your tomato garden a rest. So you could, since potatoes and tomatoes are in the same family, you generally try not to plant all nightshades all the time in the same area because you're prone to more fungus and bacteria diseases to the soil. So sweet potatoes would be a wonderful option in the summer, especially if you're not going to be there much. You're going to have, you don't want to work out in the heat. Just put in sweet potatoes. It's in a different family, so you won't have the same disease problems. You don't have to do a lot with them. If you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of rabbits or deer to come in. Rabbits don't eat too much of it. The woodchuck and deer will come in and eat all your greens. And I've had them shear down a bed before, and I just left it there to see what happened, and they all sprouted right back up. So they are a hardy plant as well.
Nice. And speaking of soil composition and the health of your soil, we have a question that asks, when you harvest the potatoes and you're ready to put in summer crops, what do you do to the soil before planting the new crop?
I really don't do anything. I mean, if you've got a general fertilizer that you can put in there and let it sit for at least a week before you add something to it, that would be good. But potatoes don't really take anything out of the soil that you need to replace. So I just cleaned it up and that's it.
Okay. And someone's curious about what the color of the flowers of the gold potatoes are.
They're the white ones.
The white ones. Okay.
I can probably buzz back to that and they can see that. So that's a red potato and that's the white potato.
So pretty.
I know it. And when the whole bed's in bloom, this is my backyard. When the whole bed's in bloom, it's very nice.
Wow, I bet. This one's nice. And then someone commented that they have grown sweet potatoes from cut up potatoes and it worked in their containers.
Okay.
And then and then Donna also mentioned squirrels like to eat my sweet potatoes and greens. It's very frustrating. I'm sure we've all dealt with that.
A lot of the critters like the sweet potato greens. I don't know how you would have to cover.
Maybe so. Oh, we have another question here. Someone mentions that we grew some in our composter from regular organic potatoes, but we only got a few. Does the compost have to be aged and how long?
I would think some of that, yeah, would probably have to be aged, but some of it may be the amount of sun. I mean, a lot of compost is not rich soil. People think it is, but it's usually an additive to the soil. So it takes a long time for compost to break down.
Yep, and continuing on with questions and comments, someone mentioned that you can start your own slips from potatoes in a jar of water in a sunny window. And Miss Connor asks, what months do you plant sweet potatoes and when do you harvest them?
Sweet potatoes, we stick them in June, or you could probably even put them into June, 1st of July. They like it hot. And then you have to harvest before the first freeze. So the freeze will actually freeze the plant, and the freeze goes through the plant and mush out the potatoes. So they can easily be in the ground all the way through to the end of October. The only problem I've had with sweet potatoes in a container, if you're going to do them in a big pot, if you have a place where you can, I'm not quite sure. I mean, at the food bank, I can put some of those big pots on the north side of a raised bed. And that way the pot is on the north side and the greens come up over in the sun. The pot itself stays a little shaded, so the soil doesn't get too hot, because the containers themselves will get very hot, much hotter than in the ground or in a raised bed. I've had the only problem I've really had with sweet potatoes besides animals is when I did them in a very large container, and the center leaves, not the outside branches or vines, but the center leaves right at the base of the plant turned all brown. And I just thought it was not enough water, but it was actually some type of fungus for the potatoes in the ground. And those potatoes closest to the middle of the plant mushed out. The ones on the outside of the pot were still good. So it was some type of fungus, and I can't remember the name of it. I did look it up, fungus or bacteria. So if the plant itself starts to die off near where you originally planted the main seedling, I guess you could call it, that's where then you should harvest earlier. But other than that, I've just harvested before the first frost. And when you harvest sweet potatoes, you do it the same way. You dig them up and let them air dry. The skins are very soft. If you do nick one of those, it will ooze a little bit and scab over, and that would be fine. It just kind of white hardens over, and it stores just as well. So if one gets scabbed over, you don't have to worry about eating that one right away. It stores just as easily.
Okay, and then flipping back over to the red and white potatoes, someone asks, if we plant potatoes in mid-March, will they be ready in time to replace with tomatoes?
Yes.
Okay.
But you just need, I mean, that big heirloom tomatoes, I don't put, people around here plant them so early in May, and they really like warm soil. And once the soil warms up, they will grow quickly. So you really don't have to get your tomatoes in the ground the 1st of May. You can plant them the 1st of June and they will do fine. And if you want to do a faster crop, so you have room in your garden for a fall crop, do a determinate tomato, not an indeterminate tomato. But again, you'll need to watch because they're in the same family. So you don't want to repeat tomatoes and potatoes all the time, year after year after year. That's one of those crops that you need to rotate.
And we actually have one last question here, and it's about sweet potatoes. Would sweet potatoes do well with okra in the same raised bed?
I do know somebody that grows it that way, and she said it was fine. Okra plants can have a large root system to them, depending on what type of okra you get. There's many types of okra. But she says she does that every year. Well, not every year, but she does okra and sweet potato right next to each other.
Nice.
I guess because the okra plant grows up tall enough and then the vines on the sweet potato cover out through her bed and across the ground. So you just have to have, it makes sense. You have to have enough sunlight for both of them.
And then someone asked, is there any benefit to removing the flowers to allow energy to go to the potato instead of the flower?
No, I don't think there is. That's just a sign. Usually when it's the same as any of your other, like if your collards or something bolted up and flowered and went to seed, that's just the end of the life cycle of that plant. So once a flower bolts, collards, kale, lettuce, that's a signal that they've been in the ground long enough and they're going to send out seeds so they can grow again next year. So it's just a sign that that's when the rest of the potatoes are being formed.
Nice. Everyone really liked it, Katie, so we appreciate you coming on and talking with us.
It's a very simple crop, and so are the sweet potatoes. You just kind of stick the plant for the sweet potatoes and the potato in the ground and let Mother Nature do its thing and good to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tons of comments still coming in saying thank you, and it was a great presentation. They loved it, and I think you've just inspired a lot of potato farmers. So
a lot of people around here don't do anything in the spring. You can easily just do a half a bed or a small section and see what you like, and then if they have to stay in the ground a little bit longer, if the plant's not starting to die, you can always put in beans or okra. Both of those go very late. So you don't have to worry about, you're not going to get your whole summer garden in with your 85 tomato plants. But beans will grow all the way through October as well. And so will okra, so will sweet potatoes. So there's a lot of things that will grow.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.